there, my name is Zoe, and in this video, we are going to be talking about how to dance to the oud. So, I've already done a lot of videos about how to dance to different Middle Eastern rhythms. Those are very important, so I definitely recommend that you have a look at those if you haven't. I will link them in the description of this video. But rhythms are not the only element of music, of course, that we need to pay attention to. So I want to do another series looking at the different instruments in Middle Eastern music and talking about how we can dance to those instruments.
So the first question is actually, when do we want to dance to a particular instrument? Because it's not going to be all the time. But the most obvious example of when you would want to choose a specific instrument and really bring out the characteristics of that instrument via movement would be the Taqsim. So actually I'm calling this series Taqsim Tips, but as you'll see, it does apply to more than Taqsim. But the Taqsim, because it is an instrumental solo, the whole focus is on a single instrument. So of course, we need to know how to best express that instrument. Yeah, and also because Taksim is usually improvised, almost always, we probably also want to improvise in our dancing. So that's why it's really good to have an idea already of how we can dance to a particular instrument so the improvisation will be easier. But as I said, the Taksim is not the only place where we might want to bring out one specific instrument and highlight that. So another super common example would be any standard melody progression. You have a mini Taksim at the beginning of that, often with an accordion, but can be with many different instruments. So there, again, you would be using these tips about how to dance to that, whatever instrument it is. Also, in a lot of classical or tarab songs, there would be moments when one instrument kind of has the spotlight, or even cases where there isn't a singer, and instead of the singer, there's another instrument. So, for example, the oud, which is the instrument we'll be looking at today, is a very common choice to replace the singer in some of those tarab songs. So that's a great time to use these tips. But also in pretty much any other kind of song, say even in pop songs, you will have moments where there is some instrumental solo. So in those cases, it's really good to have an idea of how you can dance to that instrument. So I'm going to go through, hopefully in this series, the most common instruments that you hear in Middle Eastern music. And today we are going to start with kind of the backbone of Middle Eastern music, and that is the oud. Yeah, the oud, it's sort of has maybe a similar place as what the piano has in Western music. The oud has that to Middle Eastern music, so like if you are studying the Middle Eastern music theory and all of that, probably you study on the oud. And oftentimes, when you had a small group of musicians, the oud was kind of the leader of the group. So yeah, it's like the key instrument of Middle Eastern music. And unfortunately today, in a lot of these songs that have a lot more instruments and have a really big sound, the oud often gets lost, so you won't really notice it as much, but it does shine in music where you have either a small group or a Taksim, a solo. It definitely comes up there. It will come up a lot if you dance to live music. Probably there would be an oud player, so these tips will be very useful for that. So let's talk first about the oud. We'll talk a little bit about the instrument and its different characteristics, and then that will help us explore how we can dance to those sound characteristics. So the oud It's sort of a forerunner of the lute, the kind of, you think of medieval music, right? And troubadours playing a lute. The oud came from that same tradition before the lute. And you can also think of it kind of as an ancestor of the modern guitar. So the oud and the guitar have many similarities, but there are some very important differences. The biggest difference between the oud and the guitar is that the guitar has frets and the oud does not. And I'm going to dive kind of deep into musical theory and things like that now, so you can feel free to skip this if you just want to move ahead to what can you do to dance to the oud. But I think this is super interesting and important for understanding Middle Eastern music. So I want to go into this in a bit more detail. So let's talk about the frets on a guitar. So if you don't play guitar and don't know what I'm talking about, the frets are basically like along the neck of the guitar. You have these kind of ridges, or you just see them as like lines going along, going perpendicular to the neck of the guitar. And the purpose of the frets is that, so the way we play guitar, you have strings, right? And you pluck a string, and if you just pluck that string without putting your finger down anywhere else, you get a note or a tone. And then if you put your finger down somewhere on that string and pluck it again, now what you have done is you've basically shortened the string that is going to vibrate, right? Because that's what makes the sound, is the vibration. No finger, we have a longer amount of string vibrating. If we press our finger down on part of that string, we are essentially shortening the part of the string that vibrates, and that will lead to a higher tone than having no finger. And moving the finger to make the string shorter and shorter and shorter, the tones will get higher and higher and higher. Yeah, and this applies to both the oud and the guitar, and pretty much any stringed instrument. Now, what is the purpose of the fret? The purpose of the fret is that if I place my finger down and I have a fret after my finger, then the string is actually going to come down, not where my finger is, but where that next fret is. So that means that even if I move my finger a little bit to the right or to the left, the amount of string that vibrates will be the same. So that can make life a bit easier for guitarists because you have a little bit more space to play around with your finger, and it will always be the same note. But that also limits the number of tones you can play. So in a typically tuned guitar, you should be able to play all of the 12 tones that are standard in the Western scale, right? So the normal Western scale is made up of 12 semitones, basically. That's all there is. And that's fine for the guitar. But Middle Eastern music uses more than that. Middle Eastern music uses in-between tones, which are called quarter tones, although they're not always exactly in between a semitone, but it's more or less in between your semitones. And that's what gives a lot of Middle Eastern music its very unique sound and kind of richness and color, and the way that you might automatically recognize that some music is Middle Eastern and not, say, Western music or something like that, because of these quarter tones. And on a guitar, you cannot play quarter tones because you can only play the notes that your frets are determining that you can play. The oud is fretless. So that means that if you put your finger down, but then if you move it very slightly to the right or very slightly to the left, you will get a very slightly higher or lower note. And that means that the oud can play all of that rich Middle Eastern music. So that's just a key difference between the oud and the guitar, and also kind of a little primer on some basic Middle Eastern music theory. Now, let's talk about the other characteristics of the oud and the sounds that it makes. So, like the guitar, the oud is plucked generally, so it's a melody instrument, but it's percussive a bit in the sounds it makes. That's why it can also almost serve as a percussion element sometimes. And you get a lot of this very strumming sound with the oud, and we'll talk about that again very soon. But the other important element of the sound of the oud would be the range, so the pitches, how high and how low the oud can play. So the oud usually has a range of about 3 octaves, and they can be tuned differently, but in a standard tuning, your lowest note would be a C2, which is the C that is 2 octaves below middle C. So middle C is like the middle note on the piano, but yeah, it's kind of the basis that you, when you're doing your notes, start from middle C. So 2 octaves below that, and then the highest string, so you usually have 6 different tuned strings, and the highest one would be then 2 octaves above that, so middle C. And then of course you can play higher than that, because by placing your finger on the string, you can get another octave's worth. So you can go to the C above middle C, more or less around there, about 3 octaves. So this range is kind of a mid to low range. It's about where a male singing voice would lie. It's kind of a rich, mellow sound to it. So now that we've talked about that, let's see how we're going to bring those elements of sound into our dance. What movements can we do to capture these characteristics of the oud sound? So, as I said, the oud, we have a lot of this strumming, almost percussive quality, and so a great movement to do to the oud is shinnying. So again, these are never rules of like you have to do this. They are guidelines meant to help you to make improvisation easier. But for me, almost always, if I hear an oud, it's a good time to shimmy. Yeah? And the shimmy depends on what the oud is playing. It might go faster, it might go slower, it might be looser, it might be tighter. So yeah, it's a good time to practice also shimmy variations. But shimmying is really great to do to an oud. And then sometimes the oud, it will be strumming, and it will get a bit slower and just do like very short, distinct strums. And in that case, I like to do just some isolation, so like stomach hits, yeah, or maybe some little hip hits, or a broken ummi, or a broken camel. Little things like that can emphasize those short, plucked notes on the oud when it's not going as fast as when you might be shimmying. So those are some movements we can do. And now let's talk about that other aspect of the sound, which was that mid to low range of notes, that kind of rich, mellow sound. And to get that across, usually for an oud, I like to do movements that are in the mid to lower part of my body. And luckily, in belly dance, that's where like almost all of the base belly dance movements are anyways. But so basic hip movements, your eights, any kind of eight, horizontal, vertical, Maya, ummies work really well, camels, focusing on the lower section of your body. I have videos talking about the technique for all of these movements. I will link them in the description to this video. But yeah, any of those kind of flowy, juicy, lower body, torso type movements work really well with the oud. And of course, we are going to have to layer them with the shimmy. So we would do, for example, an 8, but layered on the shimmy. So this is really good practicing for layering shimmies. And if you want to have a look, I also have some videos about helping you with your shimmy layering. So all those things, also horizontal circles in place, single hip circles, all of these work super, super well. Again, with the shimmy, with the layering, to bring that oud out. Now, what the oud is not, it's not, like I said, it's kind of a quieter instrument. So usually I'm not going to be doing like super big, flashy movements, like arms all the way up here, or a big turn, or like tossing my head around, or really a lot of arm stuff. I do some arms to just complement what I'm doing with my hips and my shimmy, but it's not so much in the upper body. It's a very kind of internal instrument. It has a lot of this internal feeling to it, and I like to try to bring that across when I'm dancing to an oud. So, yeah, those are the main tips, the main ways I like to dance to an oud. We have shimmies, and usually layered with any of your hip and mid to lower body movements, camels, circles, ummies, mayas, vertical 8s, horizontal 8s, single hip circles. All of that works great for the oud. And in those sections where the oud kind of gets a bit slower, then I add, again, mid to lower body isolation type movements. Stomach hits, hip hits, broken ummies, things like that. Yeah? So, let's turn on a bit of oud Taqsim and try out those ideas. I'm going to just improvise using those ideas. You are free to follow what I'm doing or to improvise on your own. I definitely encourage you to do that at some point, even if right at this moment maybe that's a bit too much. But at some point, for sure, turn on some oud music and have fun improvising. we can dance to the oud, a very important instrument in Middle Eastern music. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that you liked the concept. I hope to make more videos talking about other Middle Eastern instruments and how we can dance to them in the future. So if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Thank you so much for watching and happy practicing.